Hello, my name's Lipa. I am now walking, although I'm not walking, am I? Hold on. I have now walked the self-proclaimed walk of shame. It has been a while. No, actually, it has been a month, which is not exactly a while, but it is a bit. It has been a bit since Twice More and More music video came out. So first of all, I have now seen the video, which I had not done for the recreating Chaeyoung's dress. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it because nobody else did. So yeah, I saw the video. I know that the dress was only in it for 2 seconds, and now it is over a month since the video came out. So I have decided to cover my tracks. No, not cover my tracks. I've decided to keep face by letting you know that according to this Instagram post, the dress Jeongyeon the dress was wearing was a Cecilie Bahnsen. I have seen this and similar dresses all over the place this summer, so I really wanted to make one. And this price is kind of crazy.
Hi, I'm Ryan. In my life, it's kind of crazy.
I recreated this dress, obviously not of the same high quality, but I'm gonna not put myself down. I did an a-okay job on it. I recreated this and I want to let you know that I've only been sewing for about a year intensely, but I made this dress in 2 weeks and I thought I could do it in 3 days, which you probably could have because 2 weeks is definitely not the time that is required. I did a really good job for like 2 days, but then I got obsessed with K-dramas again and I wasted 2 weeks away only sewing when it was not melting point hot in my room. So yeah, what I want to say is that if an amateur seamstress with only about a year of inexperience, let's be honest, can remake this dress out of her parents' old duvet cover, then so can you. So without further ado, let's get into this video. Yes, a duvet cover tends to always have two sides like the two breads of a sandwich. So to split the two layers up, I just tore them apart by all 4 sides. One could make a similar dress to this one with just one of the 2 layers, since this was a king-size duvet cover. But since my skirt was very long and very gathered, I needed to use a bit from the other one as well. So starting off by making the top part of the dress. I actually started by making a sleeve, but I made it way too tiny. Since the back of the original dress was almost completely backless, I wanted one front piece and then 2 very small back pieces. There were air quotations there. They really don't cover much of the back, so it's more like a side piece. So I made one long rectangle piece. 2 A4 papers and about 10 centimeters seemed about right for the length as well as in width. Like the papers with what? Yeah, I think you get it. I made my top a bit longer than the original dress, just because. Also, the fabric was a bit see-through, which is scandalous if you go braless, which I don't go anything but braless, so I cut out 2 layers. Then I apparently had to go and iron them for some reason. Actually, maybe this is why it took me 2 weeks to finish. Then I pinned the 2 pieces together at the top and the 2 sides, and sew that down with a straight stitch. Then I turned it right side out like a pillowcase. Oh, now we have the full set! Wait, oh yeah, I tore the duvet cover apart, didn't I? Okay, never mind. Now I had to decide where to split this big front piece into a proper sized front piece and 2 tiny back, but really side pieces. So I put on a tight fitted tank top and traced its 2 side seams onto my top piece. Using a fabric pen, I traced so that it was fitted, you know, bigger by the chest, slimmer towards the waist, but since I had already sewn the outer side seams shut and everything, it wasn't necessary at this stage. You will see why in a sec. That is very much wrong. Focusing on the non-squiggly line, I filled it in properly, folded the top in half, and cut out my 2 backless back pieces. So then to create side seams, I pinned them back on again. And now take note of how it didn't matter that I shaped the side pieces earlier, since the already sewn together edges needed to be at the already sewn together top of the front piece and the other side outwards in the back. This left me with this low piece from the front as a, I'd say waist, but I don't want to hurt its feelings. Okay, so for making the kind of straps, although not really, like the straps that were going to be sewn together with the sleeves to create gathering, this is that one failed sleeve we're not going to talk about. So on this now scrap piece, I just measured double the amount of how wide I wanted the strap to be, plus 2 centimeters because I needed about 1 centimeter seam allowance twice. That's one of those air quotes explanations that only makes you more confused, but give me a sec. Okay, so I wanted a strap of 2 centimeters, so I cut out 6 centimeters for tour. Important announcement if you are to make this. I wanted to utilize the failed sleeve, which we are still not talking about, and the length of it wasn't enough to make 2 straps. Which isn't exactly a disaster, but I will from here on blame it for the 2 weeks delay. So yeah, preferably cut out the piece that is long enough to be 2 straps from the beginning, to avoid redoing these steps. Okay, so I folded the strip or strap in half and ironed it down. Then sewed. Now to turn it right sides out, I pinned a safety pin like this on the fold, then fed it through the opening until reaching the exit on the other side. To make it nice and flat, I ironed it again. Okay, seriously, is this why it took me 2 weeks? Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I need to get me a backless swimsuit. Oh, and so I pinned one end of the strap to the very back of the top, and situating it at the height I wanted, I adjusted the strap to the length I needed. Then I tried my best to mark this out both on the strap and where on the top I wanted it to sit. Then I measured this length for the other strap. So then I cut that first strap to the right length. And here's a mini series of me redoing all of those steps. Okay, so finished with the 2 straps, I wanted them to be sewn into the inside of the top to make it real neat, so I had to seam rip the very outer edges at the top of the back pieces. Then I turned them wrong sides out and pinned the straps to the edge with the seam inwards. Then I sewed both straps in place following where the original stitch had been before seam ripped up. This is how it turned out, real neat, we love to see it. Then I did essentially the same thing for the front piece. I made sure the strap wasn't twisted. I also just clipped or cut into the seam allowance of this neckline. It's not a neckline, but yeah. Then to make a sleeve pattern, I took a T with a large sleeve and just traced out the shape on a bit of a thicker paper. I think this was recycled gift wrap. Inconveniently, this sleeve had 0 curves whatsoever, much like myself, so I had to make one myself, and basically I didn't need to trace it to begin with. Then I split it into 6 equally wide pieces. I drew numbers onto them too to keep track, but I forgot to film it. Okay, so now I could make however ginormous sleeves I wanted by moving them about, trying my best to keep the same amount of space in between them. I didn't measure how big mine were, but for reference, they were each about half the width of a king-size duvet cover. Also, they were bigger than my table. I'll measure it now. Okay, so my table is 96 centimeters. So far, I only did one sleeve because I wanted to make sure it was large enough. So just to test this out, at the very top of the sleeve, I sewed with the longest straight stitch, no back stitching, then quickly gathered this by pulling the top thread. Then I tried this on and it looked real nice, so I removed the gathers and flattened the sleeve out again so that I could use it as a pattern for the other sleeve. Now, because I wasn't super, or maybe not in the slightest, thorough making sure the 6 sleeve pieces were even before tracing and cutting, when folded in half they were quite uneven. So I folded both sleeves in half and put them on top of each other, then cut them straight, shorter towards the armhole seam because once sewn on, it will be longer than the middle of the sleeve, which is not what we want. Then once again, but properly this time, I sewed with the longest straight stitch along the top of the sleeve, no back stitching. By properly, I mean I now sewed 2 rows, which will help gather more evenly, and it is a necessary safety precaution in case one stitch should break, which when you're dealing with this much fabric is the end of the world as we know it. The sleeve folded in half, I pinned down the one seam, then sewed. Now again, lightly pulling the 2 top threads, I gathered the entire sleeve until it looked good, not striving for final gather here. Now starting off by pinning the seam of the sleeve onto the side seam of the top, I started quite far down on the top because I love me some room, or as much room as I can get really, for my armpit to breathe. I wanted the gathering and poofiness to start and end by the strap, so I arranged the gathers in this way. So then I went the whole sleeve round and gathered it as even as possible and so that it fit within the strap. Then I sewed that down on the non-gathered side, first with a basting stitch. See, this is the reason I added 1 cm seam allowance twice, this being the second time in case you shouldn't have missed it. Then I tried that on and it looked real good, so I sewed it down once more, this time with a regular straight stitch. So I just repeated these steps for the other sleeve. Now to finish off our sleeve, to gather it at the bottom, I made another strip or strap, but it's not a strap, it's a cuff. So again, I cut and tore a 5cm wide strip of that piece of fabric we're pretending I did not think was big enough to make these giant sleeves. Then I tried this on above my elbow, and oh thank gosh, when folded in half it was the perfect length to make two little cuffs that weren't tied in the least, because again we need air circulation in there. Then I repeated the steps of how I did the straps. I ironed it so that the side seam was only visible from one side, making this the wrong side. Then I cut the two strips in half and pinned the ends right sides together and sewed it close. For some reason I sewed a zigzag stitch, but I wouldn't do it again because it made it more difficult to press open the seam allowances neatly. Now for the sleeve's bottom gather, I did the same thing as for the top gathers, except these went full circle. 2 long straight stitches, tug on the 2 top threads and gather it until it fit within the cuff. Then I put the cuffs on top of the gathers right sides together, pinned and adjusted the gathers, making them even. Then I sewed them together, first with a basting stitch, then with a regular straight stitch. And to completely complete the sleeves, I cut off all excess fabric. I know this looks really dangerous with this sharp enough to cut into air knife roller from hell, and it was, so I was super careful not to cut into the sleeve. Oh, and my fingers. To finalize the top, I had to make something in the back to keep everything in place, I'd say most importantly my chest. And I wasn't too big of a fan of the original solution, so instead I went with a bow longer than this video, which is already excruciatingly long. So I cut and ripped out a strip that was 9 centimeters wide and as long as the king size duvet cover. Then strap style, I folded it in half and ironed instead of pinned it down, and before sewing I cut the 2 ends diagonally to create that classic ribbon. So then I sewed it close, not at all forgetting to leave an opening so that I could turn it right sides out. Okay, so I forgot. Then I ironed it once more neatly. To seal the opening, I hand sewed one type of invisible stitch, and I'm terrible at this to be honest, and I don't know how to explain what I'm doing, so here you go I guess. Now, once more I had the seam ripped into the already sewn top, this time right next to the strap but on the side towards the back and not the top. So I pinned it on the inside and sewed it in place. Now finally moving on to the skirt, it is tiered, meaning several layers, typically of different lengths, like a wedding cake. I've actually never had wedding cake, I think mainly because I'm never invited to weddings. I made it sound like I did something bad at a wedding and now I'm banned from them all. Perhaps I did. Anyway, so I wanted the first layer to end at the hips, which it looked like the original did. So I tried the entire fabric on and measured. Then I cut and tore it out. Now this piece was the entire king size long, and I did not need that kind of length for the first tier, so I folded it in half and tore it into 2. Then I was to gather the tops of the tiers. For the front, I think we're familiar with this type of gathering now. I sewed 2 straight stitches at the top, tugged on the top stitches and gathered, trying to make it as long as the front of the top or bodice so we don't get confused. Now with the back of this tier though, we're changing the game. I'm not good at expressions. Anyways, I needed the back to be relatively tight, like not really tight at all, but like somewhat sitting onto my body, because it would be right above another region which I don't wish to flash. I also needed to be able to enter into this thing without using zippers or buttons. So I folded in 1/2 centimeter, 1/5 of an inch, and sewed, folding as I went along. Then I measured a small elastic I wanted to use, which was 1/2 centimeter wide, in order to make a channel to push it through. So I folded in about 1 centimeter, 1/2 centimeter seam allowance on the wrong side of the fabric, but pinning on the right side where I wanted to sew. So yeah, then I sewed. Once more, a safety pin came to great use. I just pinned it onto the end of the elastic and inserted and tugged it through the channel, which gathered it. I then tried it on, and actually I had to make it way tighter than I thought several times. But eventually it was a good tightness, but not too tight because that's not comfortable and I have a big head that needs to pop on through. So I cut the elastic how I wanted it and zigzagged both edges, securing it in place. Now, I pinned the 2 pieces right sides together down one side and sewed. Moving on to the second and actually last tier, but I'm thinking the top part should qualify as tier so that my wedding cake comparison still works. Oh yeah, I measured from where the second or first, I don't want to confuse anyone, although I probably already have. I measured from where the first tier should end to where I wanted the skirt to end, and I wanted to make it a bit longer than the original, because personally I like dresses that end on top of or right below the knee. Anyway, so I tore out 2 pieces that were 60 centimeters, 24 inches, yes, very long indeed. Also very wide, a very wide skirt indeed, that has a front and back piece, each the size of a king-sized bed. Anyways, I needed to use some of the second layer of the duvet cover for this. Then back at it with the long straight stitches to gather. So then it took a hot minute gathering those 2 pieces to match the first tier. I also could and maybe should have done this before sewing and gathering, but this worked out just as well. I pinned and sewed front and back second tier pieces together down one side. Now to match them all up, I started by pinning the for now only side seam of the top tier onto bottom tier, right sides together, the bottom of the top tier onto the top of the bottom tier. Okay, so then the next step is a bit tricky to explain, but essentially I pinned them together so that there were also some gathering between the 2 tiers. Otherwise the skirt would just be super wide. It's tricky to explain, but really wasn't tricky to do. I just made sure it was gathered evenly. Finally, no, I'm not finished, sorry, but now it was time, I guess, to make it into a dress. So I pinned the top onto the skirt right sides together, starting by matching up the side seams. Now the 2 back pieces of the top I just pinned and sewed down right on top of the elastic. It removes the stretchiness of those parts, but it didn't matter, I fit my big head through anyways. Then I also pinned down the remaining side seam. Then back to the machine and I sewed everything in place. And now, may I say finally, to finish it off I had to hem the bottom. I really wanted some cool layering, if that's the proper term, so I made it shorter in the front and growing curve-like to be longest center back. So yeah, I sketched out the best straight curve I could on the skirt folded in half. Then just pinned the edge to really cut evenly, and yeah, cut that out. As previously mentioned, it was overly larger than the original, so I seized this opportunity to make a big double hem, 4 centimeters from fold to stitch to be exact. And because there was a lot of fabric to cover, I couldn't be bothered hemming as I usually do. So I folded in about 1 centimeter onto the wrong side of the fabric, and then folded it again, this time 4.5 centimeters. Then I pinned all of this down on the right side of the fabric. This was quite the time consumer, so I treated myself to watching my K-drama at the same time. Then I sewed that down with a slightly longer straight stitch just to save myself some time. It's now been exactly 2 weeks and so the dress is finally finished. Yes, what she said before she was so rudely interrupted. And now the grand reveal.
Really nice?
Yeah.
Seductive, mean, tired, happy. Can you show me those? Like, how would you hold them up and look at them? Like, this is Sound of Music drum.